Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. Welcome back to the series of videos where I talk about dragon lore in Destiny, because why not? I'll link the first part of the series somewhere in the description or the comments, and definitely at the end screen, because yeah, there's a lot of stuff I've already gone through. That video was over 50 minutes long. In that first part I went over the basics of the Ahamkara and what they are, where they appear in the history of the Awoken, and also where they appear in the history of the Hive. That whole video is chunky, but it's a good predecessor to everything that comes next because it covers everything you'd need to know for the basics. This time, we're going to be discussing the event that really defines the Ahamkara as they are today, the Great Hunt. Spoiler alert, it doesn't go well for anyone. For those of you asking, we'll be covering Riven in greater depth, as well as the story of Eris Morn and her specific interactions with the Ahamkara later in other videos. This also brings us to the events of Last Wish and what followed. Before we get to any of that though, we are going to need to cover what I consider to be one of Destiny's greatest tragedies. Not simply one tragic story of a species that was consigned to extinction and murdered en masse by Guardians, but also of the Guardians who fell into the many traps laid by the Ahamkara. Before we start on the Great Hunt, I wanted to talk in detail about something that I should have covered last time. Namely the Ahamkara's involvement with the Cabal Empire. It's a limited history compared to the Hive and the Awoken, but it's definitely worth remembering, especially because it involved the Midnight Coup. The short version of the story is that somehow Emperor Callus had acquired a shard of Ahamkara bone. This might seem convenient to some, but when you consider the sheer scope of the Cabal Empire, it's not too surprising. It's worth remembering that the Cabal literally have what are known as Athenaeum worlds, where they will store an enormous amount of powerful artifacts, knowledge, and the spoils of previous conquests. The scale of the Cabal Empire isn't truly documented anywhere, but we know that it's spread out enough to cover vast portions of space, and that it brought at least a half-dozen different species into the fold of the Empire as either enslaved peoples or client species. Even if no Cabal directly laid eyes on an Ahamkara, it would be incorrect to state that the same couldn't be said of the Sindhu, the Clips, or even the Scions. We do also know, however, thanks to the Lightfall Collector's Edition, that the Cabal found something out in the deep which was the source of this strange artifact. They found the remnants of Anaharmony. For those of you that didn't watch the last episode, Anaharmony is where the Gift Mast was located, a massive structure of light around which a civilization known as the Harmony were raised into prominence by the Traveler. This was also a structure that protruded from the core of a black hole. This is one of the many civilizations destroyed by Oryx and the Hive, and it is here that the Harmony turned to the Wish Dragons in their hour of need. It's also here that Savathûn vivisected them, and Xivu declared that their gods should be theirs alone, and that she'd shut them all in cells. The specifics of when and how aren't clear, but we know thanks to the Lightfall Collector's Edition that a shard of Ahamkara bone was recovered, and that it was made into an ancient and not often used trinket of the Cabal Empire. We know this thanks to the lore book that centers around Keitel's story in the lore. There's a short excerpt of it that gives us the information we need on this topic. It reads as follows. "Father," I say, "I want to ask you something." He sips from a goblet, an overturned bell better than 5,000 years old. Of course. What did you want when you took the throne?" Want? He beams at me. "Now you're asking the right questions. Not duty, but want. What I wanted, my star, was to make the world better. For you." A piece of my heart wails to believe him. "But I was not yet conceived. What did you want for yourself?" "Other than the chance to conceive you, my star. Well," he fishes around the edge of his throne, holds up something knobbly and worn down. "Very few Cabal will ever see this. It is the Imperial Trinket. An ancient bone recovered from the debris around a once radiant black hole. Scholars tell me, Keitel, that eons ago, a species lived around this deepness and built an engine to tap its solar jets. But something came upon them from the dark and killed them all." I know the tale. One of the Evocate General's proofs that we must become mightier yet to survive. Of course you do. Now, this bone is a predator. It feeds on the gap between what you have and what you want. Did you use it against the Praetoriate? Yes. And do you know what I found? That you could not, because you wanted nothing. I was lost, Keitel, adrift in fog, utterly unable to desire or need. All I could do was be. The bone has nothing to feed on if its wielder wants nothing. Yet, ever since your birth reawakened me, Keitel, I have prized above all else the ability to want, the hunger to exist as more than mere existence. That is what I want now, to feel, to be more than just a being. What of my mother? Didn't you want her back? Oh, child. He looks into his wine, his bone, and he begins to salivate with tears. This is how Cabal cry, passing the anguish from the brain to the bowel for digestion and expiation. She had to care for me when I was but a husk of a man. I was selfish. I was cold. I broke too much between us, and I cannot bear to hear him stumble any closer to grief. And she left, and then you found someone else, I quickly finish. Yes. I tried to find someone more appropriate to my station. It didn't work. But at least I still had my daughter. He folds the bone away. He smiles tenderly at me. And what is a daughter, except the wish to have something to love? This moment is one that comes just prior to the events of the Midnight Coup, the incident in which Dominus Gall and his fellow conspirators overthrew Callus. Keitel was amongst their number, and she was coming to her father in this moment to confess the nature of the plot against him. After this interaction, though, she clearly decided that her allegiances were with the conspirators and not her father. When Callus fled to his throne to retrieve the shard of Ahamkara bone, the one thing that might keep him in power, he was met with Keitel sitting on his throne. She took the bone in her hands and crushed it, but only after uttering the words, "Father, I will not be weak." Callus might not have been able to have an effect on the Ahamkara bone earlier because of his overwhelming lack of desires, but the same might not necessarily be said for Keitel. The Cabal Empress, full of fury in that moment, wanted to prove that she would not be as weak as her father. It's not impossible that in this moment, in its own strange way, this might have been something that the Wish Dragon's remains picked up on, and fate might have been twisted. Keitel wished and stated that she would not be weak. After all, maybe this has come true. She now stands as the ruler of her people, but also faces the ultimate test of their strength. To face the Hive God of War that has destroyed your home and have to reconquer it? There can be no greater test of strength than this for a Cabal Emperor or Empress. Regardless of whether what remains of the Ahamkara twisted her desires into a bargain or not, the bone that Keitel crushed would be another altogether common sight, something we would see regularly in Sol, and the Guardians would conduct this great cruelty. They would be the ones to undertake what is known as the Great Hunt. But what was this event? Well, it's the colloquial name for a campaign conducted by the Tower against the Ahamkara. The objective of the campaign is summarized well within the grimoire from back in the day. The grimoire card Ghost Fragment Legends 3 is really where we should start with all of this. After great deliberation, it was determined that the Ahamkara be made extinct. It was not an easy decision. Power had been obtained from the bargains, and the city needed power. Knowledge had been gleaned, and the Ahamkara knew answers to questions no one had known to ask. But the price was too high, and no edict or forbearance seemed to stop Guardians from seeking them out, driven by hope or vengeance or despair. The call had to be silenced, so the Great Hunt did its work, and thus the Ahamkara were made extinct, their call silenced, their solipsistic flatteries erased, their great design, if it ever existed, broken. Of this you can be assured, O reader mine. All these years later, and the presence of that "O reader mine" at the end of the sentence makes me wonder if it was written by Riven herself. Spoiler alert, she was the only dragon to survive the Great Hunt. It's actually with her that I want to start, because I have a bit of a suspicion here that Riven is tied more into the Great Hunt than we might originally have known. A little theory and a little background before we dive into verified tales, that I think is going to be important. But I think it is worth jumping into this explanation, and you'll see why. When Mara came to the system originally with the Awoken, she was immediately under threat, and her command was put into jeopardy quickly. In the Telic 1 lore entry, we saw one of her responses to this situation, which was an order that she gave to Prince Uldren. The exact excerpt reads as follows. In time, Mara appointed paladins to oversee her new military, as Alice Lee had done during the Theodicy War. She created talented starfarers as corsairs to scour the asteroid belt in utmost secrecy and to establish routes and caches that would support the covert motion of Awoken ships. Most of all, she charged her brother with the mission that occupied her thoughts. "Brother," she said, "never again can I allow my people to be divided. We must offer them more than shielding ice and cold habitat cylinders and the warrens of Vesta. We must make a culture, a thread that binds us all in pride and wonder at the mystery of ourselves. Nowhere does culture flourish better than a city." "Gather in one place," Uldren warned her, "and you make yourself a target." Mara had considered this and found an answer. "Go forth and find me a power unknown to all the other powers of this world. Return it to me, and I shall make it the cornerstone of my new city, where the Awoken shall dream of all they have been and all that is yet to come." So Uldren went out voyaging among the worlds, swift as a blue-shift ghost. In time, he returned to the reef with a creature not larger than his hand, saying, "Behold, sister, the lie that makes itself true. This is an Ahamkara." Mara desires this unique source of power, and Uldren found it in the form of an Ahamkara. By the end of Telic 2, Riven has a moment where she realizes that she is able to create a wish for Mara, despite her incredible control over her own desires. The desire to keep her people safe is one thing that might have pushed through, though the desire to still be able to love Siar Aido is absolutely the stronger contender, given that the moment occurs when Mara professes the circumstances of what is required for someone to love her in a rather tender fashion. However, mixed in with all of this, there is the possibility that the mission that occupied her mind most, as was being put, the original demand that Mara made of Uldren, was something that Riven might have eventually picked up on and worked to eventually grant in time, for a power that is unknown to all other powers of this world, a unique power. I think that this moment might eventually have led to something terrifying, a moment where Riven herself set in motion the events of the Great Hunt. This wish could have been twisted in any number of ways, but the way that Riven chose to answer it, I fear, is terrifying. Now, this all feels speculative at first, and it's hard to know the truth of such a moment. Regardless, Riven would desire to see her kin eliminated as well, and we know this because of two passages that give crucial context on the Great Hunt. One is from the perspective of an Awoken who was helping to fortify the heart of the Dreaming City, and one is from the perspective of a guardian called Joxer. Yes, that Joxer, the one who we saw fused into his ship as he unsuccessfully piloted it into the portal that the Witness had made. He was the test craft pilot, and he's very much not with us now. In short, the Vanguard had made the decision to enact the Great Hunt and had requested assistance from the Awoken, given that this was a system-wide problem. They generally wouldn't get responses from the Awoken, but in a rare exception, a Techian would meet with Joxer and would exchange weapons that had been loaned to the tower for the duration of the hunt. And this bit of lore comes from the Plate of the Great Hunt, and I think it's our first hint as to the idea that Riven was indeed one of the people that engineered the Great Hunt. Take a listen. Joxer checked the safety on his rifle for the 9th time. Ilan of the Techian stepped out of the greyness before him. A massive coffin-shaped container levitated at her side. "You won't need that," Ilan said of the rifle. Joxer kept it in his hands. "All that light and still your key motivation is fear. It's fear that drives you to ask the Queen for help." "The Ahamkara are blasting and paving entire regions of Venus," he said. "They wouldn't be so base. They're rewriting Venus." "Whatever. It's a problem I can't punch. Do you have guns that will help or not?" The massive container lowered itself before the Titan. Ilan lifted the lid, and pale cosmic light from within reflected off Joxer's eyes. "Long rifles, close-quarter weapons, silent killers in the night. All yours to borrow. You must return these when your hunt is complete." "Why?" Joxer frowned. "Those are the conditions of her bargain. Take it, or leave it." "Her? The Queen?" Ilan didn't respond. Joxer took the entire container on his back. Now, I think there's a reason why Ilan doesn't respond there at the very end, because at the mention of her in this question from Joxer, she doesn't reply with, "Yes, her as in the Queen." I don't think that this is a request and a bargain that comes from Mara. I think it's a bargain that comes from Riven, the other potential her in this situation. This is something that is directly confirmed by the other lore entry, which is found in the Greaves of the Great Hunt. That lore is from the perspective of the Awoken who helped to build the fortifications at the heart of the Dreaming City, and it reads as follows. "So the Dreaming City would have a wall too?" Leona Brill stared up at rows of blank circular plates with dread. "This one was more valuable than everything behind the wall of the last city, and not nearly as defensible. The tower has asked for help in its great hunt. If the Vanguard knew that the help the Queen rendered came at the behest of the Ahamkara, armies of Guardians would storm the reef. So they will never know. The Guardians brought this on themselves. The bargains they made and the power and knowledge they gained was equivalent to the chaos wrought on this system by Whispers. The Queen was glad to help them clean the mess if it meant Riven would be the last living Ahamkara. Power is useful, unique power more so. Leona wasn't sure if she was as glad as the Queen." Now, there is a little bit of ambiguity here, because this request apparently was rendered at the behest of the Ahamkara, and it's not clear, thanks to the way that the English language is structured, whether this is a the singular or the plural. It could have been a request on behalf of all the Ahamkara. It could have been a request on the remains of the one Ahamkara that was being stored behind the wall, and I think that is the case, especially seeing as this is a note made about how the Queen desired unique power out of the Ahamkara. If Riven was planning on being the last living Ahamkara because that's something that Mara desired, this would be an excellent way of doing it, by eliminating the others of her entire species. Let's just contemplate that, though. That is terrifying. Riven was so keen to grant a wish for Mara if this is the case, that she put her entire species to the torch and effectively aided in their genocide. Remarkably terrifying. Powerful beyond belief that she was able to enact such things, and truly cold, malicious. It's a reminder that Ahamkara are dangerous, even unto themselves, even unto those who would deal with them in all manners of good and positive ways. The Ahamkara are not to be trusted. Of course, I say all of this, and it's hard to confirm if this truly was the wish of Riven or the wish of the Ahamkara generally, but regardless of whatever the case may be, I believe that it's not relevant to the rest of our story, because the reality is, regardless of whether Riven helped create the Great Hunt's circumstances, and whether it was Mara's wish that ultimately led to this, The result was the same, which was that the tower would begin to undertake the Great Hunt, and many notable Guardians would take part in a terrible campaign of extermination that was ultimately successful. So here we really pivot and start talking about the Great Hunt, and I should really start by noting here that of all the people you could possibly send out to hunt the Ahamkara or to make bargains with them, there are few worse possible candidates than Guardians. Principally, Guardians are powerful, but to an extent they are also completely uncontrolled and wild. This is what drives the majority of the issues when facing an Ahamkara in particular. They have little ability to control their desires, which means that even as the Ahamkara were being slaughtered, they were granting wishes of the desires that the Guardians were projecting in an uncontrolled manner. More so than that, there's a further issue that even in death the remains of an Ahamkara were capable of making bargains just like the living creatures were. Hunters and warlocks had a particularly bad habit of collecting those remains, be they claws or spines or skulls, and using them as a means of gaining significant power. More than one exotic piece of armor features the remains of an Ahamkara, and most of them tend to end up in the hands of warlocks or hunters. There were many who took part in the hunt, such as Zavala, Ikora, Tallulah Fairwind, Caliban 8, Eris Morn, Wei Ning, Praedyth, Pahanin, Kabir the Legionless, Lord Shaxx, Galida Tuyet, Teiko 3, Oros, Luoth Feng, and even the Iron Lords such as Lady Ephrodite and Lord Saladin. All of them took part in the great hunts against the Ahamkara, and today we'll be going over their stories and the results of their wishes, or at very least what fates of those may have unfolded and how they might be related. First, we should start with the three characters intrinsically linked with Venus and the Vault of Glass. This is, of course, the first Vault of Glass fire team, the great warriors that would try to take down the fortress of the Hazen Lords and would be soundly defeated. Their names, of course, were Praedyth, Pahanin, and Kabir the Legionless, and their fate was seemingly going to end poorly no matter what. But it might have been first sealed when the warlock Praedyth strode into the heart of battle with the Ahamkara. This moment can be seen in the age-old Bond auto rifle, which reads as follows. The driving bass line of a classic song from old Earth drove their prey before them. No less than a half-dozen wyverns snarled and clawed at the trio as they stabbed and blasted their way through the wilds of Mars. Praedyth wished hard, wished it would never end. Alongside him, Kabir was a towering giant, an Awoken-made weapon roared in his hands and in his head. Pahanin was a force, a living embodiment of the void. Where he pointed, Ahamkara died. In the middle between them, Praedyth smiled. A winged and scaled lion with a boar's tusks leapt at him, and he could swear he saw the thing wink at him as he tore it apart. Beneath the song, Praedyth heard static, like a comm signal. Best not to think about it. Praedyth wished again, and the hunt went on. From such a nondescript and easily twisted wish as, "I wish this would never end," one can see how Praedyth's fate might have been sealed. His fire team would enter the Vault of Glass. Pahanin would flee and be haunted for the rest of his days, until he was eventually slain by Dredge and Yor. Kabir would become one with the Vex, but the grisliest fate was that of Praedyth himself. He would live on forever, trapped within the confines of the vault, imprisoned for what might have been what amounted to an eternity, until eventually he was released by the Vex during the time of the Taken War, when all we found of him was bones and a faint flicker of light. This would not be the only time that Guardians would have their wishes twisted to bring them into harm's way, and it would not be the last time they were fed to the Vex either. Galida Tuyet and Teiko 3 were sent after one of the Wish Dragons, and the fate of Galida and her fire team seemingly was decided by the influence of an Ahamkara feeding on her desires. Their story is found in the Apex Predator lore tab, and it reads as follows. The massive Vex construct that was the Ahamkara towered over them, and Teiko 3 tried not to be bored. Being bored might lead to idle wishes, and that would be bad right now. She thought again about the names she'd squinted at on the porcelain chit when she'd drawn lots back at the tower. 2 name guardians always struck her as a little pretentious. Galida? The warlock didn't look up from the drawing she was making. She just held up a finger. Rear ventral plate, please. Graciously, the construct shifted its superstructure and allowed the researcher a detailed look at the thing's internal workings. And there. The warlock turned toward Takeo. You may proceed. Finally. As Galida ran clear and the beast warbled a Vex war cry, Takeo hefted the massive rocket launcher up over her shoulder and sighted down the line. Girl's gotta eat. To give this some brief context, Galida Tayet was a leading warlock weapon researcher. Her fire team of 6, designated as Fireteam Tayet, was interested in gathering information on Vex weaponry. Galida Tayet supposedly had Banshee even commission a weapon frame for her in the past, a sidearm that she would take with her as her fire team went to Venus. This fire team was lost, and the sidearm was the only thing the Vanguard was able to recover when they initially sent a search team. Upon our own investigation, we found a dying ghost of one of the fire team members, who instructed us to destroy a Vex Gate Lord. The Gate Lord's radiolarian fluid gave the ghost the necessary knowledge to recover the legacy of Fireteam Tayet, a weapon schematic. Parts for this weapon had been amongst the earliest recovered remains, which the speaker then released to us. Banshee then instructed us to charge up the weapon's mysterious core and stabilize it, and the weapon that this created would be the Pocket Infinity, an exotic fusion rifle from Destiny 1. Galida Tayet likely died mysteriously to the hands of the Vex because she wished to understand the Vex enough to make a weapon that could use their own power to incredible ends, and in this form Pocket Infinity was made. Maybe this was caused by the presence of an Ahamkara's bargain, one that might have led to her death even as the weapon, the brainchild of her creation, was given life and purpose. Some wishes made by Guardians on the Great Hunt might have been long-winded and nondescript, that could have been easily twisted. Some of them were painfully blunt. Such was the wish of Wei Ning, one of the strongest titans to ever live. Her hunt was undertaken with her friend Eris Morn, whose exploits in the hunt were numerous and well documented. The lore from the hunter's armor, the vest of the Great Hunt, tells their shared tale. It reads as follows. Venus, the Great Hunt. The Ahamkara refused to die. For a day, Wei Ning had been fighting it to a standstill with her bare hands, cratering it repeatedly into the ground. Eris had seen wish dragons drive titans mad by refusing to fall to brute strength, but Eris was pretty sure Wei Ning was already insane. Confession time, the titan said as she hammered punches into the Ahamkara's tentacled face. I've been wishing this fight would go on forever. Eris balked. Please stop, you psychopath. We have 6 others to handle. No, we want this, trust me, Wei Ning said. An hour later, 6 shapes emerged from the Venusian foliage. Ahamkara. Their compatriot, whom Wei Ning continued to pound into the ground, was pulsating, growing stronger, feeding. The others had come to feast at the same table. Eris pulled her arc blade from the air and blinked. When the hunter and the titan finished their hunt, Eris thought she heard Wei Ning whisper. Did you say something? I was about to ask you. Huh. Wei Ning wishing for that fight to go on forever is unsurprising. It also might be the thing that drew the other 6 Ahamkara in, considering that her wish was something that the main Ahamkara was consistently feeding on. But the outcome of such a wish is also dangerous. Perhaps the twisting of this wish was one that influenced Wei Ning's final fate, death at the hands of Crota, the Light Eater. A battle that would be known as the Great Disaster. A battle in a war that still rages between humanity and the Hive to this very day. It's not clear if this is actually the fate that was influenced by the wishes or not, But one thing can be certain is that Wei Ning is no longer with us, and the dragons probably didn't help. Wei was far from the only Guardian to join the fray though. The notorious hunter posse known as the Six Coyotes did some hunting of their own and came face to face with an Ahamkara that used its shape-shifting powers to twist the knife in a remarkably painful manner. The story of Nadia and Shinobu, members of the infamous Six Coyotes, is displayed in the Chattering Bone pulse rifle. It reads as follows. Nadia sipped her tea, calm and collected. Shinobu sat back, looking perplexed. Really? The entire summer? The serpent that claimed to look like her mother sat across from the two of them, smiling broadly. Why would I lie? I'm telling you, the whole summer you wore that dress. We had to tackle you to get the thing off of you, get you to bathe. The serpent plucked the dainty cup from the white saucer and set it to her lips before continuing. Your brother called you Stinkbug for years. Until, you know. Nadia reached over and took the other hunter's hand in her own. It would lie because it's fulfilling your wish, Nobu. Shinobu searched the serpent's face. Her mother just smiled again, all teeth and secrets. Shinobu felt tears at the corners of her eyes. Her voice was barely a whisper. Okay. Now. The burst from the pulse rifle was loud, and Nadia pulled the trigger again and again and again. To have one's wish answered directly and so cruelly is a trick that an Ahamkara rarely pulls. Shinobu was a character who had much reason to be tricked in such a way. She was originally from a town called Coyote, where she grew up and eventually was convinced to flee by the Guardian Nadia. Fallen raiders were inbound and one Guardian would not be enough to stop them. However, as Nadia and Shinobu fled, Shinobu died and was found by a ghost within a very short span of time. She found her old name in the journal on her person, but she didn't have any of her memories. I think above all, she wished to know what her old life was like, as well as what her mother was like. She would return to defend the town with other Guardians, but it's possible that she lost her brother and mother in the attack from the fallen House of Kings. This wish is a cruel reflection of that desire. Tragedy would not strike her alone, though, and it would not be the most notable casualty of the Great Hunt. Now, I will admit this is potentially not a part of the Great Hunt, as it might simply be related to the Ahamkara generally, but it's a story of the first hunter dare, a dare that put forth Tallulah Fairwind as the stakes in a bargain, something that would ultimately cost her her life. This hunter dare was also something that would affect Caliban 8, the second hunter vanguard. They were playing cards with an Ahamkara, and Tallulah Fairwind lost. Tallulah Fairwind smoothed the felt of the table with one hand, idly playing with her chips with the other. Across the table, Caliban 8 wore a green dealer's cap, and looked stricken. The Ahamkara looked like somebody's kindly old grandpa just now, and it could play a mean hand of cards. 20, it crooned as it raised the stakes. She saw Caliban's eye sensors dilate. The game had started so well, and it seemed like a great story they could have told back at the tower. How was she supposed to have known? Cool, said Caliban, tension in his voice. She looked down at her hand. All in. The Ahamkara's grin grew larger. Caliban shook his head. Don't you do this, Lula. Don't you leave me here. I can't do it. The cards went down. She'd lost. The Hunter Vanguard tossed her bow to the Exo as the Ahamkara came around the table to collect his winnings. A dare's a dare, man. Good luck. She didn't scream. That wouldn't have been dignified. The timeline of this isn't specific except for the fact that it's known that Tallulah Fairwind was one of the earliest hunters in Destiny and was the first Hunter Vanguard, and therefore it's not clear if she was actually Vanguard at the time of the Great Hunt. What we do know is that this is a moment when a Guardian was slain by an Ahamkara, and where Caliban 8 had to take up the mantle of being Hunter Vanguard himself. Such is the nature of a hunter's dare. You have to take up the mantle if you lose. Again, it is possible that this occurred during the Great Hunt, but I don't see why the Guardians wouldn't directly engage in Ahamkara if that was the case. It's possible that Tallulah lost this game because of the wish of every Hunter Vanguard, which is simply to not be in the Hunter Vanguard, to be free, as hunters do indeed crave freedom, it's what they thrive on. And in a way, she was being granted freedom from her position, that place of authority that left her stranded in the tower. In all the sadness for our lost friends, it might perhaps be possible to find some sadness for a defeated foe as well. This is what perhaps happened with Lord Shaxx as he took part in the Great Hunt himself. He defeated a Wish Dragon soundly, but before it truly died, he spoke to it. This is a moment that was witnessed by Eris Morn and Zavala in the hunter armor grips of the Great Hunt. That lore tab reads as follows. Venus, a year into the Great Hunt. Eris and Zavala watched as Shaxx sat with the dying Ahamkara, a hand on its snout. Is he gloating? She asked. I think he's too pragmatic to gloat, Zavala said. Mourning, then. Perhaps. The Ahamkara twisted. Its eyes rolled up into its head. The biochemical glow just beneath its skin grew harsh. Zavala and Eris raised their hands against the increasing glare. Then, the corpse exploded. Dirt showered the Guardians like dusty rain on a clear day. Shaxx sat silently in the resulting crater, covered in a sheet of green fire. Zavala and Eris opened their mouths to speak, but Shaxx interrupted them. Shh, he said, as the flame quietly roared. They could all hear a disembodied whisper, but they were used to that by now. We still don't necessarily know the result of this moment and if a wish was indeed granted, but then again, it is one thing to remember that Shaxx is a character who's had some interactions with the Ahamkara even past this point. He is somewhat of a somber fellow in some regards. He respects his foes as much as his allies, especially when they had no part in choosing their destruction. Even as a warlord, ruthless and brutal, Shaxx always seemingly had a code. The Ahamkara were dangerous, but they were the beasts who followed in their nature, not beasts that chose to strike against Guardians deliberately. In this respect, they were all innocent, and perhaps Shaxx knew this. Shaxx's later involvement with the Ahamkara is interesting given that he owns what many people have suspected to be an Ahamkara skull. It rests above his post in the tower, above the crucible frames. This is something which Shaxx has had for years and no one's really questioned it. Maybe it isn't an Ahamkara and it's just the bones of another creature from Io, but if it is, it's kind of a terrifying prospect. This doesn't mean that there wouldn't be other Titans forced to make hard choices during the Great Hunt. Such was the tale of the Sunbreakers Oros and Liu Feng. They hunted in a pair and faced a pair of dragons. The confrontation resulted in a terrifying moment that required nerves of steel and great conviction. The two Ahamkara they hunted shape-shifted to perfectly match the two Sunbreakers. This confrontation is displayed in the Nation of Beasts hand cannon. It reads as follows. She held the handgun pressed against Liu Feng's head. Oros blinked through the sweat. Liu Feng held the handgun against Oros's head. She shivered. Across the river, as if in a mirror, another Liu Feng and another Oros looked back at them. Two Liu Fengs, two Oroses, 4 handguns. The Liu Feng that was cold opened her mouth. I wish. When the shooting stopped, only the Guardians still lived. They stared at each other from across the river. How did you know? Liu Feng asked. I could feel the heat of the forge on my skin. Oros shook her head. You could not? Liu Feng shook her head also. Forget these tricksters. They can teach us nothing, and you have so much left to learn. It appears that the Sunbreakers here wished to survive their ordeal, or at least Liu Feng might have. Oros recognized the heat and fire of a fellow Sunbreaker from across the river, but Liu Feng's wish might have inadvertently caused disaster. We don't know exactly what the wish was. She did utter it aloud, but it's worth remembering that the Sunbreakers are no more. In the Red War, the whole of the Order of the Sunbreakers died at the hands of the Red Legion. Oros, who ended up being their third and final Imperial Magistrate, was there, holding the line as they died and fell. Perhaps if it wasn't for the Red Legion's suppression of the Traveler's Light, they might have held out. But perhaps equally, the wish magic of the Ahamkara on that day twisted the wish that was made in those moments and led to the death of Oros. I wish to kill the correct Oros might be a wish that's somewhat easily twisted in time. We're nearly at the end of our tales here, and I think we saved one of the most fun for last. The tale of the Iron Lords Ephrodite and Saladin. This also gives us a really interesting bit of chronology here, which I should explain. We know that near the end of the Dark Age and the beginning of the City Age is the time frame in which the Great Hunt took place. We know this as it was around the same vague time period when the Iron Lords fell in the Plague Lands and Siva was unleashed. Ephrodite and Saladin were actively hunting a dragon here. That's important because it places at least a portion of the Great Hunt before the death of the Iron Lords. Remember that Ephrodite disappeared after the Iron Lords were defeated, and it was believed that Ephrodite was dead until she reappeared in Rise of Iron. So we now know that the Iron Lords were around to fight the dragons. And oh my, did they fight some dragons. The Transfiguration lore tab shows us this spectacular battle. It reads as follows. "You're sure you want to keep on with the axe?" Ephrodite asked, reloading her rifle. The voice in her comms was barely winded, even as the Iron Lord leapt to avoid a plume of white-hot fire. "That's why she gave it to me. I'm one of the only—" A globule of flame licked past Ephrodite's helmet, and she tugged at her clasp, shrugging free the now burning cloak. "Why in the Traveler's Crack did you wish to fight an actual dragon, old man?" Saladin Forge grinned inside his helmet. The enormous worm towered above them. Bleeding wounds covered its gleaming scales as it reared up for another breath. The massive axe in his hands was dented, scarred, and melted at the tip, but it still held an edge. "We are knights, Lady Ephrodite. Do you not want to be a dragon slayer?" He charged, and his words could barely be heard over the creature's cry. "We are what we survive." For all the forms that Ahamkara could take, Saladin wished for them to fight a classical fire-breathing dragon like in the stories of old. Saladin and Ephrodite in this moment perhaps took on the aspect of St. George, slaying a dragon in classical terms and proving their mettle as knights were meant to. However, I think Saladin's note of "we are what we survive" is kind of important here, as are the potential ramifications of his wish to fight a classical dragon. Let me explain. Saladin commonly refers to us as dragons when we enter Iron Banner, and it's clear that it's a title that he would extend to himself, given that he's actually fought and killed one. But the problem is, if you are what you survive, that means that Saladin's fate is similar to that of the Ahamkara, and it's worth remembering, there is only one remaining Ahamkara. Remember then that the Iron Lords and the Ahamkara were both felled and killed to but a single person. Perhaps Saladin's wish for them to be knights, fighting a dragon and hunting a dragon like in the tales of the pre-Golden Age, also brought ruin. The knights of Arthurian legend that Saladin was invoking within his wish all tended to die in great battles, but many were also doomed in their quest for objects of divine salvation. For the Knights of the Round Table, this might have been the quest for the Grail. For Saladin, Ephrodite, Felwinter, Radagast, and so many others within the Iron Lord's ranks, this would have been Siva. The power of the nanite swarm they unleashed killed all the Iron Lords present in the Plague Lands on that day, save for Saladin, and Lady Aphrodite, who fled. Such is the fate of all knights who fight for others. They die in the service of those they protect. But it's perhaps worth remembering that Saladin's wish to be what he survived might have quite literally put him on a parallel with Riven. Riven was the last known Ahamkara, and he would be the last known Iron Lord. So maybe this is the result of his wish. Maybe, inadvertently, he ended the Iron Lords. There are doubtless many more tales from the Great Hunt, and there are in fact some that we're not covering in this video. I wanted to save those that pertain to Eris Morn in particular for one of the next videos in this series. When that video does come along, we'll be covering Eris Morn and her connection to the Ahamkara and the actions that she undertook in the Great Hunt, as well as the final result of what it would lead to. For now, though, this would seem to be the tale of the Great Hunt, a mostly successful campaign by definition that would bring the Wish Dragons to extinction. At what cost? We would not know. And, granted, it wasn't truly successful, because there was still one dragon left standing. Riven of 1,000 Voices will be the topic of our next video. We'll talk about her story, including both the Last Wish raid and everything that came before, including the story of Forsaken. For now though, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please go ahead and leave a like if you did. These videos are long and they take a very long time to voice, and also a very long time to edit. So if you do enjoy them, please let us know. Also, if you want more lore on the dragons, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so that you can keep up to date with it. And if you have your own thoughts, leave them down below in the comments section. But as per usual, know that your viewership as always is quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Bife. Rhodacia Arastra. I'll see you, Starside.